Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Michele Haley, and I'm the founder and director of a 501c3 nonprofit called TogetherWell. And we had this event all day. It started at 9 a.m. We've had multiple different segments ranging from marketing your private practice to licensing. We've had virtual booths and other fun activities throughout the day. I hope you have all enjoyed yourselves and have found segments to serve you and where you're at on your journey. So I am going to go ahead and I will introduce our moderator for tonight's event. Her name is Dr. Ankasanaman Ball, and she is the CEO and founder. And her bio for all of you is also in the chat, but she's the CEO and founder of Beings Integrative Clinical Solutions. She does assessment. She actually facilitates all of our Third Thursday events for therapists. She's incredible. And she is interviewing Dr. Oreilly, who is an expert on the topic of imposter phenomenon. And Dr. Oreilly is also a Stanford psychologist and has done TED Talks, and she's incredible. So please, in the chat, feel free to give everyone a warm welcome, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. I want to just make sure that I say thank you to everyone who's been with us for this whole day event. So today, without further ado, I am going to be talking with Dr. Megan Oreilly, who is a phenomenal individual and is doing amazing work. She has been one of our guests before. As Michelle has shared, she is a Stanford grad, and she's a staff psychologist and lecturer and the program coordinator of the Outreach, Equity, and Inclusion program at Stanford's Counseling Psychological Services, CAPS for short, and the Vaden Health Center. She's been doing lots of wonderful talks and has been consulting, and she is also the founder and CEO of Inherent Value Psychology. So she has been a powerhouse offering talks and doing her most notable TEDx stage talk in 2018 to remind us all of our unconditional worth as people. So she's just been such an influence in the field and has a wealth of knowledge. So we are going to be chatting with her today about her knowledge in the arena of imposter phenomenon. And without further ado, let's jump right in. Thank you, Dr. Oreilly, for joining us today.
Thank you, Dr. Ball. It's always a pleasure to share the stage with you. And it's always so humbling to have a friend read your bio. It's kind of like, oh, and now we're going to talk about imposter syndrome, because it's always hard to hear all the great things that you strive for in a row. But let's dive into it.
Yeah, perfect. And just one quick note for anyone who has experienced any technical difficulties throughout. If for any reason there are a technical glitch or anything, we will keep rolling. And so I just want to make it clear that we won't stop. We will come back and keep on with the segment, because we want to make sure we get this amazing information to you. So with that, let's start with, how are you? How is life? How are you doing?
Oh, that's a great one, and a hard one for this entire year. But I will let you know that, this past Friday, so yesterday, I saw my last client at Stanford for the year. And it was really significant because, in early March, we pivoted entirely to telehealth. And I've been seeing clients like this all year. And so to kind of get to a finish line with on the CAP side of things, it was really rewarding. Everyone's in a different place, but I got to kind of close the laptop and just have a moment of gratitude for still being connected and still doing the work I love. On the private practice side, still seeing some folks, because the holidays are a hard time. But I've been really intentional this year about making sure I have some type of work-life boundary. And today I just spent the whole morning playing with my 2-year-old and, planning for the next year with my partner. So doing all right.
Nice. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And I think it's important to first check and see How are we doing, and checking in with ourselves and making sure that we're grounded and stable? Because I think maybe part of the base of imposter syndrome is not checking in with ourselves. So I'm wondering if you could talk a bit about what that is. What is imposter phenomenon in your own words, in your perspective?
Yes. So I actually didn't really look into imposter phenomena until I got to Stanford in my postdoc. I was far more familiar with stereotype threat and all different other types of forms of microaggressions and identity-based discrimination and stress. But when I got to Stanford, it was really important for me to understand this deeply, because I would want to say almost everyone at Stanford or in Silicon Valley has an element of this. And so I started digging into the literature. And so imposter phenomenon was founded in the 70s, I want to say early to mid 70s, by two female psychologists. And what they were doing is they were interviewing high-powered women in big positions, CEOs, partners at firms, things like that. And they were asking them, tell us about your success. What wisdom do you have for women coming up behind you? And they found consistently that these powerhouse women would say things like, someone really believed in me, or it was luck, or it's by chance that I'm here. They kind of saw a thread of downplaying their accomplishments into being where they're at. And again, this is the 70s. So when they compared that to, male counterparts about how did you get to where you are, they saw a stark difference, because their male counterparts were able to say, I worked hard, I did this, I secured this, I strategically did that. And so they're like, what is this? And so after many more years of research, they coined this term imposter syndrome or imposter phenomenon. And I'm in psychology too. So I know as psychologists, we like to name things interestingly or, get our space in the field by coining a term. But I actually think the original authors did a little harm in calling it imposter phenomena. I have been using my career and my small voice to actually change the perspective. I like to call imposter phenomena Trailblazer experience. Because
nice.
A lot of what people are experiencing is being the first at something, being the first in their family, charting a course that they just haven't gone down before. And a lot of the things that when we look at Trailblazers, a lot of the experiences of doubt and worry and anxiety are similar to the imposter phenomenon. So I like to kind of change the term a little bit so it can be more empowering, dare I say a little bit more accurate. And so that's kind of where imposter phenomenon came from.
I mean, it even feels better to say. Because if you think about being a trailblazer, it's like, pat yourself on the back a bit. But yeah, there are a lot of feelings that come along with, this trailblazer, experience. And so I'm wondering, when did you come across as feeling like you were not enough in your professional life? Because everyone goes through it, right?
Everyone does go through it, yes. And I was just sharing with Michele yesterday when we were doing our demo for this that it happened again. But I'll go a little bit in chronological order. So I'll start with undergrad. I came into I'll start with grad school. I came into the graduate program straight from my undergrad, didn't do a master's. I was fortunate enough that, my honors thesis, they accepted me at the undergraduate level. And so I kind of came in with a chip on my shoulder or a vulnerability, feeling like, oh, I got to make up for not having a master's. Everyone pegged me as a kid without the master's. On top of that, I was the only Black female in the cohort. So I'll talk a little bit more about race here in a moment. So in my graduate program, I felt it there. In my postdoc, I felt it there. When I got to Stanford, I somehow felt I needed to be fancier or smarter or more equipped somehow. And what I want to identify is that imposter syndrome can happen at any time. But what I find in the narratives that I hold in therapy is that it tends to happen at the hinge points of life. So the transition. The transition points, when you're getting a new title, or you physically move somewhere, or you're new to a cohort. And so when we're at these places where we're having to define ourselves anew to people, we're kind of up for evaluation. And it kind of can trigger the perfect compilation of events to cue imposter syndrome. It happened to me just this weekend. or earlier this week, because today's Saturday, when I was talking to a CE platform to get some coursework developed. And I was thinking after the call, like, am I the best person for this? Should they be talking to someone else? So it kind of ekes in as doubts because I was doing something new that I haven't done before. So it can happen at any time in our career. And I do tell people that because they think when they graduate, they're done with this. And so when it happens again, they feel a little low, like, didn't I work on this? And am I done? Some things we're not done with. Some things I call lifespan work. So it's going to show up in different forms. And I also like to tell clients that life is sometimes like a spiral staircase. You are going to traverse similar ground, but from a different altitude. You're a little wiser, further aware. And so that's how I experience it. Kind of coming around, but I know a little more next time.
So would you say that if you're not experiencing imposter syndrome, you're probably not growing or challenging yourself?
Let's think about this. Like a lot of things in psychology, it depends.
Right.
I really like the push on this because one of the, I guess, behavioral symptoms I see when someone is struggling with imposter syndrome is they hold themselves back. They don't speak up in class. They might not apply for certain things. They might not start that passion project for fear of failing or for fear of being called out as not equipped enough. So I think it could be fair to say that if you're not wrestling with these feelings, if you're not pushing against the grain and trying it anyway, maybe you are a little slower in that push to move forward. It's worth looking at.
I really appreciate that because I imagine that students and, grad students, undergrad students, just people in a learning position in general are finding themselves in this space. And I'm wondering, like, in your position, given that you've supervised, you've watched people in their growth, how do you see imposter phenomenon like come across in students and in their work, both inside and outside mental health? Or the field of mental health.
So to normalize the process, I'm going to actually look at my notes because I really love this question. So I want to take it back just a touch and give people kind of a three-parter of what are the, I guess, symptoms or what are the flavors of imposter syndrome? What are the things that show up if you are experiencing imposter syndrome? One of the hallmarks that I always see is what's called difficulty attributing success to yourself, right? And so all the way from that original literature to now, we're still seeing people, attribute their success to luck, to the stars, to chance, or sometimes they attribute it to a benevolent savior, like my advisor helped me, or this mentor really gave me this position, right? The worst that I see is that they attribute it to a fluke. And that's different than luck. Luck means maybe I positioned myself in the right constellation, but a fluke means it just randomly happened. I didn't do anything. Someone else didn't do anything. It's just random. And that's the worst. And actually what I see a lot, because then we have no ownership of that attainment, right? So the difficulty is an attributional error. I can't own any part of this. That's a hallmark. Another hallmark is the inability to accurately assess your competency and skills. Now, everyone listening, I want you to ask yourself, or when you've heard imposter syndrome on someone else, it often does sound like, oh, I can't apply for that, or I can't do that. I can't speak to that because I don't know enough, or I can't do that research. How would I know enough? So sometimes we have these very competent, able people kind of adjudicating their skills as less than it is, right? These are the folks among us that get great glowing performance reviews and they're like, that doesn't feel right, These are our compliment defenders as well. They can't really absorb the level that they're at. And that can actually feel really tragic, right? And then the last hallmark I see is the anxiety. Not always outwardly, right? You might not see someone having a panic attack, but it's the rumination. It's the sleepless nights. It's the things where they're caught up in, a constant worry about being caught as a fraud. And I think that was the element that gave the original authors the idea of calling it imposter phenomenon. When you Google, you see a lot of people holding a mask in front of their face, like they're an imposter or acting, because there is a lot of energy put into the pretense around acting like you feel as competent as others think you are, right? Because again, part two, you don't think you're competent. So the anxiety and the performative energy kind of spent acting a role that you don't feel you play and waiting to get caught. Like someone's going to find the error or the fault in your knowledge. Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's challenging, and I'm so glad that you were able to speak to the fact that you experienced, this phenomenon even as like recent as last week, and that it's always something that we're needing to be mindful of.
Mm-hmm.
So, in thinking about it in your illustrious career and all the wonderful things you've done, it begs to question, like, why would you still feel this way? So what do you think are some causes of the symptoms or feeling like an imposter?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Would it be possible like someone is just low self-esteem, or is it, an external kind of lack of validation? What would you posit would?
Okay. Let's muse together here, because I feel like for a long time psychology has looked at the individual and saying, what's wrong with you? How did you get here? What I really have been liking about Black psychology, feminist psychology, even positive psychology, is that we look at the environment and the system around the individual and kind of say, okay, what's going on here that has impacted you? And that's really where I like to start with imposter syndrome. Before someone is showing up or not showing up to class or not applying for something, I think it actually starts way early with some of the messaging we get around who belongs in certain spaces, right?
Yeah.
Who belongs in certain spaces, what's the image that we typically see doing the work. And so just from an academic and professional lens for a moment, I really love the campaign, "This is what a doctor looks like," or "This is what a scientist looks like," or Black women, Indigenous people were posting, them pipetting or saving a life, because we didn't see many Black and brown female images of this. So I would actually think that the threads of what become imposter syndrome actually start with messaging and oppression. And we breathe that in like smog. So when we get there, we don't cast ourselves in these roles, right? And so it erodes us before we are even needing to apply the brake.
I mean, I know there's been this campaign with representation matters, even in, and this may out me, but even at places like Target, where I should probably never go. But there has been a very interesting shift in terms of who is being represented and how people are being represented. And I'm wondering what kind of impact that might even have in the future on imposter syndrome in later years, because you are starting to see those shifts. But given that you described, this is really a trailblazer phenomenon, I'm wondering, for those who are watching and listening, like, how do you manage your imposter syndrome or that experience as a graduate student so that we can help them understand how to manage their experiences as well?
Yes. Okay. Well, I'll just be 100% honest. And when I was a graduate student, I don't think I managed it well, right? And that's the best thing about being a trailblazer, because trailblazers become torch passers. So I'm going to pass the torch and talk a little bit about what I didn't do in graduate school and what we can do moving on from there. So I think that one of the first things I would love that I could have done or others could have done for me would have been to say, what are you doubting? What is it exactly that you're fearing that you think you're not equipped for or well poised for or don't belong in? What is it? Almost like itemize it. Because sometimes how our anxiety works, it just kind of shoots all over the place with all these different permutations, and we're spinning and we're exhausted, but we don't even know exactly what we're worried about. So let's get it down on paper. I actually take my clients through this activity. On one side of the paper, they write down their doubts in full detail, right? And they're like, how is this helping? And then I'm like, wait, just trust me. So we write it down on one side. And then I like to say, to harness doubt, we get to flip it. On the mirror side of doubt is your desire, what you're actually wanting, what you're dreaming for, right? And so we write down the doubts on one side, and then we flip the page and keep it flipped and write down what we're actually desiring. What is our dream, right? Because we're actually spending a lot more cognitive, emotional energy and thus resources worrying about what's dreading to happen versus what we're desiring to happen. And then we stay on that desire side and get problem solving and actually get concrete on how would I make this piece that's a little maybe, advantageous or aspirational or pie in the sky, whatever we think it is. How do I actually bring that to fruition? And before you know it, you're spending that same energy that would be spilled out worrying, actually building what you want. And so I didn't have that tutelage. I didn't have that clarity. I didn't really know what I was worrying about. Some of the things I was worrying about could not happen, right? Just by functional. So to actually comb through, turn and face it, embrace the horror for a minute, turn and face it, and then actually figure out what you're wanting instead and plan for that. It becomes its own virtuous cycle.
Right. It's beautiful because it's ultimately a gift that you are going to be helping your clients to do in the future. And, I'm a huge proponent that everyone should have their own therapy while they're going through this process. But it's really that opportunity to reflect and then challenge your own thoughts. So I love that you shared that this is something that you learned after and along the way versus, unfortunately in grad school, what you are fed versus what you experience are two different things, particularly around like all the wonderful research papers, love them, but they don't talk about their failures either. And I think that may also be part of it. So, and I know with you being so well-versed in this area, I'm going to reference your TED Talk and ask you if you can speak a little bit to something that you mentioned in terms of how race and gender might play a role in imposter syndrome here particularly. Could you elaborate on this a little bit more for us?
Yes, this is my favorite topic and I'm salivating thinking about it. But before I dive into the deep end on race and gender, I just want to say maybe one more thing on what we can do as graduate students for imposter syndrome. So we have the flipping the doubt into desire and focusing on what you actually want. But the other thing that I think we miss, and I don't know if it's just society or time and we've moved away from more collectivist approaches, but I also think we need a journey with others. So be that your cohort, be that friends that aren't in grad school, because sometimes they have a different perspective because they're not with you, right? But what I mean by journeying with others specifically is have friends or colleagues who can celebrate your wins with you and mourn some losses with you, but mainly celebrating the wins. Because I feel like when we don't get to hold on to what we do well, it actually almost kind of runs out of our confidence bucket. We don't, and I feel like it really feeds into the inability to assess what your skills and strengths are. So when your friend hypes you up and says, that was fire, like that was awesome, you did so well with XYZ, you're like, oh yeah, I did it, right? So we can downplay it ourselves. So when we get that mirroring, when we get that uplifting, I think it actually attaches and we hold on to it better. So I think being able to do that for others, getting that done for ourselves and journeying together kind of counterbalances all the negative messages that we've had about people that look like us or people in our situation. So I really want people to hear that one as well.
Thank you. Thank you for reminding people the importance of being connected. And again, if you're watching and you were thinking about maybe networking, this is a really good reason to stay on and network and connect with other folks. And really just spending the time allowing yourself to be validated. It's not narcissistic to hear that you did a good job or even to mention to yourself, right? And I wonder if that's part of it is a fear of recognition. And you spoke about this, to some degree. It feels, even sitting here, and I've been doing this work for a long time, it still kind of feels foreign to hear, it's okay to have permission to validate yourself or have someone tell you that you did an amazing job.
And believe it or not, that is a great segue to race and gender. So when we think about race and gender, and particularly the intersection, so if you are of a minorized ethnicity and a female or non-binary, think about the compounding messages that you get around straight up dehumanization or unworthiness or especially on the Black BIPOC side, what you have to do to even show up in a space, right?
Right.
We know about the Black tax. We know about working twice as hard. So sometimes the great things we do, we don't even recognize as great because we think that's the minimum, right? And so I think race and gender are huge components to who feels imposter syndrome, how strongly we feel it. And sometimes if we are even desensitized to recognizing it as imposter syndrome, and we always feel like we're coming from the back, right?
Right.
Yeah, I just get a little vapory when I think about it, when I sit across from students that are phenomenal and they can't see it or they don't know it because of so much counter messaging around non-belonging or not fitting in or not being enough, or literal actual behaviors from advisors or professors that make them feel that way. I've had students where their work is counted out on a project because they're assumed to be, their coding is assumed to be wrong, or people overcheck their work, right? And so all those macro and microaggressions are kind of chipping away at that confidence that would have us not feel impostered.
Yes, I think that is huge that you spoke to those particular experiences, because as a graduate student, you're already contending with, like, I'm new, I'm finding my position, and you're looking to your advisors, your professors as these individuals with this expertise. So you're also relying on them to a certain degree to support your line of thinking, to tell you if you're going in the right direction. And not to mention, when you get to internship and postdoc, you have evaluations. I mean, you have evaluations all through graduate school.
Yes.
So, yeah, it seems like it is a ripe environment for experiencing imposter syndrome. And it seems like more professors and more advisors should be thinking about this with our graduate students, and be thinking about this with our, postdocs and interns and supervisors as well. So I'm really glad that you're speaking to this, and maybe we've got to do this again and have this talk for supervisors, professors, admissions counselors.
Yes. Oh, I'd love that, because sometimes they don't know a student is struggling. Right. I like to, when I do get their ear, I like to tell them, assume that they are. Just assume, even if they look like they got their stuff together, just assume that they are. And offer that more compassionate view, offer a few more check-ins, offer some wiggle room at times for things that are new and difficult, right? No one's written a dissertation before. Everybody written a dissertation is the first one, usually, right? So, but I also tell them, talk more about your process, kind of humanize not having it done or not having it done right, because we do pedestalize people that have come before us, right? And it looks like they've always done it that way. So if, Professor so-and-so can say, when I was taking this course I'm teaching you, I failed it twice, or I didn't do great on my first paper, or my research, went down the tubes, that would be like, oh, that's a thing that can happen, and you're still where you're at. And so I can take a curvilinear track to where I'm going. Maybe that gives so many people so much breadth of experience. So talk about your process, not just your final product, which happens in academia. We all talk about where it landed when it looks good, right?
Yeah, so, when it's been dusted off and it's all pretty.
Solid.
Yes, I think that's so important, because we don't hear enough stories of our mentors or the people that we look up to talking about their experiences with imposter syndrome, and just what it was like for them. That finished product often, I think, probably makes us think that we have to be a certain way and act a certain way. So just kind of thinking of where you are and in your career currently, what advice would you give graduate students who are essentially trying to manage their feelings of doubt and just get their assignments in? And we're in COVID to add on top of it. So what would you share with students, particularly in this time?
Now, I've talked to a few students now about the intersection of COVID and imposter syndrome. And to be honest with you, some people are experiencing COVID as a little bit of a relief, because there's been, at least earlier on, sometimes it drops off, But at least in the early stages of the pandemic, professors, institutions, workplaces, because I also work with Silicon Valley professionals, they kind of all gave a collective ease off the gas pedal and said, we're all in this together. We recognize a lot's going on. So, let's stretch deadlines. Let's get that work project slowed down. So some students that I've talked to have actually breathed a little bit of a sigh on the cadence, but there's all the other uncertainties of research and timelines. So it didn't quite feel like a reprieve in any sense, but on the performative imposter syndrome piece, it seemed a little lighter. But what I would actually tell students about how to manage these feelings is a little bit maybe unexpected. Most times people want to hear, how do I manage the doubt? And so I talked about turning it into focusing on your desire. How do I, journey with others? So there's these concrete things for imposter syndrome itself, but I actually like to go a little bit more global, right? I think if you dig into any distress long enough, you're going to run into a system.
Right.
I really believe that. And so one of the systems that I think if we dug not even that far into the clay, into the dirt, we would run into are things like the capitalism productive society, turning people into products of producing. I think we would run into a lot of white supremacy values. What is professional? What is academic? Who defines that? Who fits into that? And so what I would actually tell every grad student listening and tell them to spread the good word is we need to begin to unzip who we are and how we identify our worth from our work. Now, particularly in psychology, we may have come into this field to do good work, to help others, and we may identify with that very strongly, but we are not the work we do. So if something's going wrong with the work, it doesn't mean something's going wrong with you.
Can we repeat that just once more? I think that it is really important, and this is something I've seen in supervisees, to reiterate that point, that the work doesn't necessarily mean it's you.
Yes. Yeah. So for the people in the back of the Zoom room, your work does not define your worth. Yeah. And if you're in that place, it's also not your fault. Because think about how a lot of high achievers are groomed, right? We get groomed into getting a lot of attention, accolade, and value, a little bit of currency for being the smart one in the family or going to X school, right? So it can come pretty synonymous to identify as that. When you go to a party and someone asks, what do you do? They're kind of echeloning you, And so how it's built into society is we kind of we become accustomed to over-identifying what we do as who we are. So we're going to be swimming upstream here. We're going to be going counter the grain, but it's so much more better for our mental health when we do. When we define ourselves by our values, because that can map onto any job or any degree, right? When we define ourselves by what we enjoy, who we care for, how we do that. And so there are these bigger things. I like to say, if you have many pillars supporting your identity, when one shakes a little bit, school, research, grant you didn't get, it doesn't shake the whole structure. But if you're spending your whole self on just one identity, if that even quivers, you're going to feel very off balance. So support yourself with so many pillars of who you are, because there's so many beautiful ones, even if the world doesn't find it as shiny. Right?
No, I think that's absolutely wonderful. There's also a new effort to normalize taking breaks, and that somehow we had normalized working until the point of exhaustion or working till breakdown, and that being the gold standard. And I think that is doing such a detriment to the health of not just our generations, but the younger generations too, that are striving to work so hard and be perfection. And then you come across a new situation, or as you described, you're going into that growth point or being a trailblazer, and then you're faced with this, and that experience can be, I am assuming, very, very triggering in many ways.
Yes.
So I'm going to deviate a little bit from our line of questioning, but I'm curious about your experience in terms of seeing imposter syndrome and like major depressive disorder, or of course like anxiety disorders as well. And, you know, in your experience seeing that, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. I like to say these two things, imposter syndrome, anxiety, depression, can all exist separately. However, I often see quite a bit of overlap, especially in student population, and sometimes for working professionals. But with students, I often see, especially for anxiety, general anxiety or performance anxiety, or even sometimes social anxiety, I see, you know, elements of the imposter syndrome, and that makes it difficult for them to show up. Sometimes people can have imposter syndrome on their own, on its own, without any kind of diagnosable other disorder. But when they have a diagnosable disorder, I often see these other elements as well. And so I don't have literature to quote for this, but that tells me just experientially that perhaps imposter syndrome on its own, taken chronically over time, many experiences, could lead to a diagnosable disorder. And so that's why I like to be preventative, kind of change cultures and environments to kind of nip this in the bud, because I've seen graduate students come in year one and leave very differently, right? Year 4, 5, 6. And so what's happening in that, right? And so I do think there is a meaningful overlap that would behoove systems and departments to really look at how it's unfolding.
I appreciate that perspective, because it is important to look at, you know, and I see this unfortunately more times than not, where, you know, a student is just saying like, I can't do this. I need to take a year off because, you know, I need to figure out how to be more prepared. And there are some students who do need to take that time off because they have to take care of themselves. And then there are some who are feeling like they can't finish a program or they can't finish the school because they just aren't like everyone else. And that's, I think, a big flag for me. It's like, well, what does that mean? Is it that you don't understand the concepts, or you don't understand the data, or you don't understand what you're doing, and you have a glowing review, but when you're feeling like you're just not like everyone else, so maybe this isn't a right fit for me. So I think that's important to be thinking about.
And I got to tell you, Dr. Ball, this hits home. This hits home because my older sister, Genius, went to get her PhD in high energy particle physics. Now, she's comfortable with me sharing that she already had her own history of depression, right? And then she went into this rigorous physics program. And I think that if we're going to use a little diathesis stress model, I think the cutthroatedness, the harshness, the microaggressions in that department exacerbated her already existing past history of stuff, and she wasn't able to persist, right? And so I really think it can exacerbate pre-existing problems or become its own diagnosable problem over time. And so many of our beautiful Black talent and otherwise gets lost. And then we can just think about their loss on investment for what they would discover or do in the world. So we all lose when any of us isn't well.
I cannot think of her name right now. I'm totally blanking, but the researchers whose research is behind the vaccination for the coronavirus. Did you see that article? And I think it was in the Times, who basically their career previous to discovering like this formula that's in the vaccination, or the background of the vaccination, it's not the vaccination, was all about being doubted, and their work not being credible. So I feel like this was a great example of, you know, the challenges that this person experienced, and then their own experience of maybe I'm not cut out for this, or maybe I'm not like everyone else. And I believe that the woman, ethnically, I can't remember, but I wish my brain was better.
Yeah.
It'll come to me, of course, when we're done with the discussion. But it's an amazing example of some of the individuals who are doing fantastic work, groundbreaking work, their struggle, and it's not until some point later that they go back and talk about, well, or it's brought to our attention that there was a struggle. And I appreciate those moments of going back, but as you talked about before, we do need to have more professionals talking about imposter syndrome. And I'm wondering about your views about that and how to encourage professionals to talk about their feelings of imposter syndrome, or even support the students who might be experiencing imposter syndrome.
Yeah, I think a lot of people in power or faculty need to get together in a room and really talk about what are the norms of our department or program that aren't serving our students and maybe aren't even serving us. I think sometimes, especially if it's a long time since they've been in graduate school, they don't remember the strife. It's still fresh enough for me, but they might not remember the strife. And some, especially like in medical programs, a lot of STEM programs, and even social sciences. Let's not leave social sciences out. Right. Sometimes there's this academic hazing type feel. It was hard for me, so it's going to be hard for you. And this is how you build a strong academic.
Right.
Not necessarily. The research keeps supporting that doesn't help. So we almost need to do some healing for them. You know, what was it like for you? Why do you continue to show up this way? Do you even think it might be weak or non-professorial to actually normalize your process? So you need to do that with them. And then they might be able to share their process more outwardly and actually fold that into the curriculum even, right? And so you can talk about how something's going to take many iterations. You can talk about how publish or perish is a dichotomous, that's so dichotomy that isn't helping people actually do good, consistent, sustainable work, right? And so I think like Stanford has a great program. It's run by students. I would love for there to be a faculty version where it's called Stanford I Failed. And it's a whole sharp series of students coming forth and talking about pivotal mistakes or failures that sometimes taught them something, sometimes didn't, was just a failure. Because that's another thing in the narrative, that sometimes we only talk about the failures that catapulted us into some great success. Some are just dead ends, right? So they had this wonderful program, I think it's annual, where people come forth and just kind of open mic style share their mistakes. I think there should be an equivalent program for faculty and the people who hold power and are pedestalized. I think that would begin a lot of normalization.
I would love to hear about that. And I think in some ways there's like this dichotomous thinking about like the person who shares about all their failures must be someone who is like a glutton for pain and negativity. But I do think that there's something freeing in that experience of sharing, like, this didn't work out, and it propelled me to keep going. So I love the idea of having that opportunity to hear others. And I'm wondering if, for those listening, even if you don't have that forum, maybe creating that with your peers and having the space to have that dialogue, I think would be awesome as well.
I have a colleague, he's actually in Spain right now. He created a whole LinkedIn profile. On his LinkedIn profile, he posted his failure resume. So things he tried and didn't work out, projects he tried and things he applied to and didn't get, and it went viral, right? It was because I think there's such a humanizing need to see someone, even in his position, kind of just talking about it, right? I think it's really fascinating to see what people gravitate towards. And there's always some piece of the human condition being illuminated, right? And so we all need more failure inoculation as a culture, right? I'm thinking about writing a children's book just so we can get it in young. And so by the time they're in my office, it's like, I'm good with that. But another thing I think we need is, again, thinking about who are we off paper? Who are we off the resume? That really should be informing how we show up on the resume, right? I can't tell you how many conversations I've had with people where they're like, I could do this, shiny, prestigious thing, but it doesn't quite fit with what I actually want to do. And so sometimes I take people through this little activity. And we're in my home office right now, so I have all my little materials, where I draw just a simple Venn diagram, and one circle is validation from the world, like people are going to give you kudos and it's going to look shiny, and the other circle is your values. Some things are going to be straight up validation. This title, this position, even if it doesn't come with money, right? This title, this da-da-da. Some things are going to be square in your values, and that's going to be rewarding regardless if anyone sees it, right? And some things will have a little bit of both, and that's fine too. It happens to be nice to put on the resume, but you also want to do it. And so I say you want to find yourself in one of these two X's, values and it gives you some validation from the world. But when you catch yourself out here, if we're too often catching ourselves just out there, it's going to add up to an unfulfilling experience because the shine does dim at some point. You know, the camera goes somewhere else and then you're doing this thing, right? And so exploring our values, seeing what we're drawn to, what for the right reasons or wrong reasons, just getting really honest is a great process for all of us to do.
I think that's amazing, like to take your clients through that. And also it's visual. So I'm all about multimodal learning. Yes. So it's not just talking about it, it's taking it through a visual modality and then also letting them work it out for themselves.
Yeah, right. What things fall in what categories.
Yes, taking it out of our minds and plugging it down onto, you know, paper. It's funny, I do something very similar, but I do a chart and then we stick through it throughout the duration of their therapy to see, like, did it change? It's really important to keep having the dialogues, and it's really important to really engage others. And I'm wondering if you can talk to the students about, or talk to our viewership about what they can do to engage others in these difficult dialogues.
I would say start small. Start small, maybe a dyad, you and one other close person, cohort member, even mentor, advisor, supervisor. Supervision is a great place for it to come up. Hopefully that's safe, psychologically safe, and also going to give you some good scaffolding to your growth. But I would say start small. Assume the other person's also going through it. I just say lead with that assumption. Assumptions aren't always great, but even your friend that looks like they got all their stuff together has times of this because it's human. It is literally human. If you're walking and breathing in this space, in this world, especially academia in any way, especially it happens in art as well. But if you're living and breathing, you're going to have some element of this experience. So assume it's happening, lead with what you feel comfortable with. I also take people through what I call the intimacy ladder. Most ladders you go up, but this ladder you go down with the deeper stuff down at the bottom. So decide what do you feel comfortable with? What's a little surface, what's a little mid-range, and what's deeper, and see how people respond to each of those levels. And that's how you know you can take them, spelunk them down to your deeper stuff, right? And so start small, have psychological safety with folks, see if you can become increasingly more vulnerable and emotionally intimate with folks. And then you are not only getting some of the support you need, but you're also creating a little bit of a cohort culture around talking about this. The more steam you can let off of this, the less pent up it will feel.
You know, as you were mentioning that, I know we talked a little bit about it in the beginning, but I'm just a tad bit curious if you could, if there's research that shows a negative correlation with confidence and imposter syndrome. And I'm thinking in particular about people who are super confident in their skill set, particularly. They know that they know something, or they know that they can do something. Very similar to your experience of, like, you know that you can do what's necessary for the CE. But I'm just wondering, in terms of thinking about these experiences for those that are viewing, like, they may have confidence, but may also still experience the imposter phenomenon. So I'm wondering if you can speak to that. Is that, you know, off the radar, or does it fit with what you've discovered?
I wish that it was more on the radar, because people think confidence is kind of omnipresent. If you're confident, you're confident. You should be able to do things, right? But there is a nuance between confidence and capability, right? You can have the capability to do something and not have the confidence. You can also go the other way. You can have the confidence to do something and not the capability. Those people I'm not usually talking to about imposter syndrome. They exist too. But sometimes, so confidence is a little, when we really dig down into it, is supported by self-efficacy. And for those of us studying, know that self-efficacy is domain specific, and it's your appraisal, once again, appraisal. So we're really looking at how important your belief system is, right? That really colors and dictates a lot of things. So self-efficacy is your appraisal of how well you can do a task, right? So even if you could do it well and you believe you don't, it's going to impact how it actually shows up, right?
Exactly.
So I do think, I wouldn't be able to cite something right now, but just experientially, those people who are confident and have capability usually fare well. People that have capability and unconfident are more imposter syndrome or trailblazer in nature, right? And so it's about boosting that specific domain of confidence, right? And I think, gaining actual experience, getting baby steps, jumping out on faith and getting the data that you can, having people to support you, all of these things help boost that confidence so it can match the capability.
Right. No, I love that. And I'm just thinking too of our viewership. If there are experiences that they feel that they've had, if they feel comfortable enough sharing like a line, like this is something that I noticed, to put it in the chat and we can look at it and see how much is aligning with what we're discussing with our viewership. Because I can't imagine that this isn't something that's coming up for a lot of folks right now who are watching this discussion. And I'm just, as we're giving people space and time to do that, I'm wondering if there are recommendations that you have to help support students currently overcoming their feeling of being a trailblazer. Use your name.
Yes. I would read the seminal book on imposter phenomenon by, let me Google it real quick. Valerie Young, I believe her name is. She actually came to Stanford to talk to us. She's updated it. Yeah, her TED Talks are pretty good. She's really a stickler on the term she coined, so I'll let her have that. But anything by Valerie Young. She also has a book called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable people suffer from the imposter syndrome and how to thrive in spite of it. That one's a really great one. I would also look to counter examples. I wanted to share my screen. I found a quote. Oh, here it is. I'll read it. It's from Shonda Rhimes. Everybody knows Shonda, right? Because we're watching one of her shows. But she said, and this is so anti-imposter syndrome, she says, "I'm not lucky. You know what I am? I'm smart. I'm talented. I take advantage of opportunities that come my way, and I work really, really hard. Don't call me lucky. Call me a badass." Take many seats. Nice. I just love everything about that because she's flying right in the face of that fluke, luck, that attributional error that we make in imposter syndrome. And it's so radical for her to do that. Also, when Issa Rae did it, when she said, "I'd like to thank me, for this award, for all the hard work I did." And so it's because, especially as women, it can be really looked down upon to be confident, to own that success. So I think we've been, again, groomed and curtailed in having that voice and really kind of hyping ourselves up. So the more we can push back on that and elevate our friends when they do that, the better.
Yeah, I think it's so important to thank yourself. Like, imagine what you drag at grad school of any sort is not an easy thing. And you made the decision to go, you made the decision to do the work. And I think that you deserve credit, right? So, and
no one knows it better than you. No one knows the sweat, tears, and blood than you. So,
right. And that you doesn't come into the thank yous until way after the fact, if ever. So I really appreciate like those counter examples of like how important it is to just acknowledge yourself and call yourself a badass here and then. Like that makes sense.
Yeah. And even for things not as public as Shonda Rhimes' Emmy award-winning shows, right? Especially in psychology, I think sometimes the STEM fields and other fields get a lot of ooh, ah. but we're doing hard work, particularly now, gearing up to learn how to do hard work in a pandemic. There's going to be so much need. There's always so much need in psychology. And this work goes unsung. So if other people aren't singing your praises, you better be out getting after that. Yeah.
Right. I think that is just so important to really reiterate. That like, so I don't know how many graduate students and how many people have been told, but that this work, if you're in this work, it's just because you care. It's like, forget that it's a rigorous program and you are studying, there's training, there's, tests upon tests and all of that, the amount of hours that we invest. But it seems to be that caring is what supersedes everything. Which is unfortunate to some degree. Yes, we care, but I'm assuming that the veterinarian also cares about treating animals, or the biologist cares about exploring or doing cell research, or all of those things, and that it's not often that we hear that clinicians are attributing, or people are attributing successes to clinicians' clinical expertise or work, but more when we hear it in the mainstream, it's about they're so caring. So I really appreciate you speaking to the fact that there is work that is done, and it's whether it's the confidence that you have in your skill set, this still comes up because we're not seeing those different systems reflecting the amount of work and time and energy that goes into the work that we're doing. So
time, energy, and expertise. Yes. Our work is best when you don't hear about it, right? Think of all the suicides not, engaged in. Think of all the divorces not engaged in, if that's the best outcome. So, the unsungness is because our work is doing its best when you don't hear about the crisis, right?
Right.
So, we really got to be lifting ourselves up. And this relates directly to pay equity, right? And learning to advocate for yourself if you go into consulting or speaking or anything, really, private practice, setting your rates. So it's just knowing what you're worth, knowing what value you bring because of who you are and your expertise, right? It really echoes through how you show up in a lot of domains.
And I'm going to go back to that point, really making sure that you evaluate your worth, right? Because, and if you are in grad school currently and you are watching this, please take a course or really connect with professionals while you're in grad school about evaluating your worth and setting your dollar amount for whatever you do, whether you choose to work in an organization, whether you want to go into private practice, like being very mindful of how you determine what you should be paid, because I think that's a big issue, especially around imposter syndrome. If we're given less, does that validate a belief that's improper? Or if we're given more, then do you question whether you're actually worth that? So I think it's a really important thing to explore on the financial end. And maybe we can have you do a talk on that in the future.
Yes. Well, because I have been, I don't want to say I had led myself astray, not being able to do that calculation route. Especially this year with all the need for consultation around DEI. I think it's just astounding that people don't want to pay Black women what they're worth for the work that Black women do. I mean, Tiffany Haddish and the Grammys, right? So you got to know. You got to know. You got to know.
Right. And I think even across the board with various ethnic groups, whether Asian, African American, Latin, it's been so interesting to see the efforts that have come from a movement that has basically unfurled during the pandemic. We're seeing so many people coming out with like no, this is my value. This is my skill set. This is my expertise. And so I am super fascinated to see what happens with research in this particular area. Could you tell me what you think that you're going to see in terms of the research in the next like 5 to 7 years?
Well, I do think the face of work has changed. Now that we know we can get things done from home, I think people will start to demand more flexibility. They didn't demand it before because we thought we couldn't, or we didn't want to lose our job or be too complainy. We are seeing that people can adjust, right? The systems can adjust. So I think people are going to be asking for more. I think that's going to show up in a lot of different ways. Personally, for us at CAPS, we're not going to be able to put this telehealth genie back in the bottle. We're actually going to be able to extend access to care over breaks, well, maybe not, I don't know about internationally, but interstate, right? Because we were always confined by state license. So I think it's really going to manifest in a lot of different ways where people are starting to get an inkling of, actually, this having to go without something prompted me to figure out what I really need. And I no longer want to go with, I don't want another system telling me that I can't do that. So my bar is going to be different when I'm applying somewhere, or my questions are going to be different when I'm interviewing them, when they're interviewing me. I hope, and I hope I see, especially in BIPOC groups, more self-advocacy collectively and allyship with each other. And so we're just going to be asking for more, demanding more, and not settling for less.
Right. Well, I think everything that you have shared has been so amazingly supportive of all the work that we're doing, all the growth that we're going through. And it sets the stage for asking the question, is this a valid experience for me now? If you are experiencing imposter phenomenon or trailblazer, trailblazer syndrome, I'm just thinking about, being able to reflect on, is this a growing pain? Is this a growth point? To then be able to do that reflection as well. And I love just all the tips, especially about connecting, making sure that you are reaching out and having those opportunities to be vulnerable and share, like, this is a good thing that happened, and get that validation, as well as sharing this is not necessarily a bad thing. This was either a mistake, and mistakes are learning opportunities. So I really love the points that you have brought and are sharing with our viewership, because I think that if this is something that they're experiencing, this is information that they can take away and use in their everyday lives.
Yeah. And I would just echo that by saying, if it is something you're experiencing, you're not doing something wrong. The only thing that's happening here is you're moving through a part of the human experience that you get to attend to and attend to yourself.
Yeah. And I think that's the other piece about it, is you have to attend to yourself. And I wonder how much of that experience of imposter syndrome is a forcing mechanism to really attend to yourself and make sure that you are taking care of yourself.
Yes. I think that really could be a nice way to think about it. I like to say that our emotions are messengers, right? And so what is this telling me about my environment? Maybe something lacking in it, maybe something I need to add to it. What is this telling me about early socialization? My value set, am I clear on my values? What is this chronic feeling of not-enoughness? What is it telling me, and how do I remedy that for myself and others? So,
yes, I had a professor in my undergrad, absolutely wonderful Professor Mr. Talley, who he was in our acting classes. But one of the things that he said, and it stuck with me, is that if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, it's basically, to your point about being a trailblazer, it's like the metamorphosis period before you turn into a butterfly, right? You're shedding all of the things that don't fit and are no longer useful, and you're embracing, or being forced to embrace, an experience where you're just a different person, and you're going to need new methods. And so, and that it stuck with me, even though the use of it was about stepping into a character. And it was like, I'm feeling this outside of acting. So
I can apply this over here.
right. And it's so awesome. That's why I love your example of it being about trailblazing, because if you are new to a situation, you don't really know how you're going to respond to that situation or environment. So, do you fit in? Maybe not. Maybe it's this opportunity to think about how you want to navigate that situation. So I just love everything that you shared, and this has been such a wonderful discussion. And we've also identified 2 more topics that we'd love to have you come back and do in the future.
Let's get them all. Let's get them all. Yeah.
Yes.
We gather and we talk and we listen. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. And I'm just wondering if there is anything that you would like our viewership to take away, like one key point that you would love for them to take away from this evening's discussion.
I'm gonna rip off a L'Oreal. You're worth it. You're worth it. The dreams you're thinking about, the projects, the life you want to live, you're worth it. And the only person on this earth that really has to believe that is you. It's not your job to convince anyone else but yourself. Once you have that, everyone else can just see it and feel it and follow you. And so you're worth the dreams you have for yourself. So go get them.
Thank you so much again, Dr. Megan Oreilly, talking with us about imposter syndrome. Love having this discussion. Really appreciate all the work that you're doing. And definitely, if you haven't already checked in the chat for the resources and the books that she's listed, please definitely check back. I think those are some great reads. Yeah. And I just, I think this is something that people experience over and over. So definitely think about where you might feel like you find this in your personal experience, and then use the tips and tools that Dr. Oreilly has shared with us this evening. Thank you so much.
Appreciate you all. And I'll be adding some healing content on my Instagram on this topic and many others that I come across in therapy. So you can follow me at MEAG_PhD, and we'll be in touch.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And that will also be in the chat as well, I believe. I'm pretty sure Michelle's already on it. Thank you again for your time and the work that you're doing. And we will see you again, hopefully soon.
I hope people go sing their heart out. That's a good release as well.
That sounds so fun. I'm super excited.
Thank you, Dr. Ball.
Thank you. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. This has been such a wonderful just discussion and very informative with Dr. Oreilly. I want to close with saying a big thank you to all of our guests, all of our speakers and moderators. And thank you so much for participating. I know it's been a very long day and many are eager to jump into some of the activities at the end. So I won't keep everyone too long, but definitely be mindful that you have these wonderful opportunities. Oh, and I also just want to say a big thank you to the businesses that contributed to the virtual booth. We had the Hume Center, Bats Improv, ATABS, and DJ Purple all doing a fantabulous job monitoring the virtual booths. And then our sponsors, again, are ATABS, the Pollination Project. Thank you. The Pad, who is offering the amazing Pilates and yoga. Thank you again as well. And TogetherWell, I just want to give a big thank you to TogetherWell. You guys are just doing fantastic work, and this platform has been amazing. I also want to say, and if any of you are looking to give back to the community through the mental health workshops, consider joining, because it is a great resource. TogetherWell is a platform for promoting you and the wonderful things that you can bring to the table. Don't let imposter syndrome get in the way of you joining TogetherWell. It is absolutely fantastic. And it will give you an opportunity to showcase the things that you feel are in your wheelhouse. They're currently offering a free membership for therapists, and all you need to do is go through the verification process. So definitely take a look at TogetherWell.com and learn more about this awesome platform that brings you these Third Thursdays. So once again, thank you so much from TogetherWell, and we want to wish you all a wonderful evening, and thank you so much for joining us. And with that, I will bid you adieu until next time. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.